other capacities as well. And I will now turn it over to my co-host, Brevity.
Thank you. My name is Brevity Langley, and I'm the alternate format and remediation specialist at ACC. I have long dark hair and wearing glasses and a dark blue shirt. I think I'm in my middle age now too. So, and then I have worked with ACC for about 8 years, and then I also worked at University of Denver and did some digital accessibility over there.
Brevity is amazing, just so everybody knows that. And you just have to
Nice
know
to meet
that coming into this. Sorry, I muted too early. So the first thing that we're going to do is I just first of all want to acknowledge that if you want to put it, actually ask a question. If you want to put in the chat what you do, because part of making this conversational and interactive is we kind of want to know who we're talking about. If we've got a room full of instructional designers, we want to have that conversation. If there's some teachers in here, we want to make sure that we're hitting some points that will help you as well. So please feel free in the chat to drop your name and title or whatever you want to share with us. But the first thing that we want to do is acknowledge the work that is being done by teaching and learning centers, instructors, professors, designers, everybody across the board around accessibility. I've been part of higher ed since about 2016, out of state and in state, and I know that there's been a lot of work to get things in the spaces that they need for our students to be able to engage, whether that's UDL, whether that's WCAG, the new Title II laws that are coming to effect. So we want to acknowledge that first because we know that it has been a long uphill role for a lot of people. ACC says we're here to move mountains, and if you work in anything to do with accessibility, it is much like moving mountains. And so thank you for everything that you've done around PDFs and alt text of images and captions, everything that you've been doing. We really just kind of want to go into the now what because as folks who work in a disability access service office, we see things that go beyond just sort of what we've come to understand is your standard accommodations. And with that, I'm going to let Brevity sort of lead us into where we're going.
Thank you. Yeah, I am just going to touch base about how accommodations work and the process of it from our point of view in the Disability Services Office. So we have students that will come in that are referred different ways. They might have had an IEP in high school, accommodations at another college if they're a transfer student, or they might have just been given information about our office from someone else at the school, an instructor, and we do include all that information in the syllabus for classes too. So they come to us a couple different ways. And the first thing that we do is we get them an appointment with one of our specialists, and we have them kind of go over any documentation that they have from their doctor, and then also just kind of giving a background of what kind of a student they are, if they're a new student, if they're a student later in life that has taken some time off. And so we get background from them and see where we can try to help them with the barriers that they're facing in their courses. So based off of their meetings with our accommodation specialists, that's when they create that letter that goes out to the instructors for each of their courses. And those accommodations are going to look different for each class. The letter will be the same. So sometimes they're in a science class and some of the accommodations won't apply to those courses. So, math and science, they can have formula sheets, tactiles, alternate assignments. And then there's also things that kind of cover all courses. So extra time on tests, early access, text to speech kind of things. So it can be a little overwhelming when people see those letters and not know what each accommodation means and what they should be doing for the student. So we also meet with the instructors and kind of bridge that gap and try to figure out what is applying to the student and if they need any help with what needs to be accommodated for each of those students. After they get their accommodations and the instructors are aware, we also have our side of the office, which is the technology side. And so we are training these students on how to use software, hardware, whatever it is that they need to bridge the gaps and to also help with their barriers to make sure that they're getting everything that everyone else is getting in their course. So we teach them text to speech. We teach them how to use recording devices, things that will record online in their online classes. And then throughout the semester, we're there for support. So anytime they need to touch base and kind of see what's going on, or if they have questions or something's going on in their class that they're not sure of, they can come to us and we'll support them throughout the semester.
Thanks, Brevity. Before we move on, I just want to, again, because we've had a lot of people come in late, feel free to turn on your camera. Feel free to throw your affiliation and job down in the chat. We, again, want to make sure that we're able to kind of make this personalized for as many of you as we can, especially with such a small group. And a lot of folks don't know that process, and that's why we wanted to include that. Some of you may be aware of how things work in a disability services office. Beth, thank you on that description there. That's helpful to know. We've got those instructional designers in the room. I wanted to talk now a little bit about how those accommodation letters work, and sometimes there's that gap there, like what Brevity was saying, that we will often meet with instructors to explain how we can implement those accommodations within that subject matter. If you have a teaching and learning center or instructional design center, whatever it's called in your office, that's a great place to meet up with folks because they know a lot about how to make sure things are being integrated into your course as well, how to do some of that back end accommodation, adding if it's for like extra time on test in your LMS or within McGraw-Hill or any kind of integrated materials you're using. And your disability offices are great places as well. We try very hard to find that balance between you are the subject matter expert. We are here to make sure that what you're trying to engage with the student is allow them to be able to make sure they get to that material. So sometimes it's testing is the biggest probably hurdle for a lot of folks. How do we write an image description that doesn't give away the answer? That's where we want to work with you all or the instructors to know that we're doing that the right way. Or you guys can come to us and say, hey, I've got this really intricate image that I'm trying to make sure that the students are identifying all these different spaces. How can I explain this well? Because alt text is just not going to cover it. And so just making sure that we have that partnership. We love that. A lot of people don't even think about us or coming to us. They don't even know who we are in the office. And we love it when somebody reaches out and says, I'm not really sure how I should do this, but I think I should do this. And we spend a lot of time working directly with instructors one on one. We work with chairs and deans as well. So, whatever those offices are, or maybe you're the person, right? Maybe you're the instructional designer or you're the DAS specialist. You've probably got that same story. I think reaching out to instructors to have those conversations is also always helpful before we run into an issue because obviously, as you may be aware, that again, they're not even thinking about who we might be on this side. It's just never crossed their mind. And before things go south, we want to have that rapport. So that's part of what we do in our DAS office as well. Sometimes also it's about those alternative formats. So again, if you're WCAG, if you're working on making everything accessible, you've probably done the regular 12-point font, sans serif. You're doing all of the things, the headings. But then you have a student that has enlarged font, right? Or you have a student who needs a very specific font so that they can read the materials correctly, or there's an alternative media, but you're using an OER book. These are the things where, yes, we're hitting WCAG, but now we have this accommodation letter. We have this student who needs a little bit more assistance from us. And that can be what maybe makes things a little bit uneasy between the student and the instructor as well. And so that's where we come in, and that's where we want to work with everybody on making sure we find the materials that the student needs and making sure that we get them to them in the way that works best for them. Another issue that then happens with that is the communication with the student. One of the things that we try to work really closely with on the students is what accommodations do you need for your particular class? You may not need extra time on a test for art history. So why are we going to put you through scheduling a testing appointment with the testing center? But you do recognize that in math or in history, you really do need that extra time due to maybe the anxiety or the comprehension level that may be related to your disability. And so working really closely one-on-one with students to meet them where they are is really important to us. Sometimes we will reach out to an instructor because students really are anxious about that. Online classes can be even more tricky because those students are not on campus. They're not typically coming into testing centers. And Colorado system really is doing a good job at making sure if you're in an online class, you don't need the barrier of having to go into a testing center. But what we try to do then is make sure we know how those accommodations work in that online setting and working with those instructors to know in this particular situation, this is how you can meet that accommodation. I just had an email with an instructor for a student who has an online proctored test, who has a calculator, standard calculator as an accommodation, and they worked out that, how they can show it on camera before they start to test. Just little things like that that a lot of people, the student never thought about it. The student never asked about it. So it's creating those points of communication so that everybody is on the same page. How do the students know how to find their course materials? Are they shared in D2L? Are they shared within like via email? So students who have early access or who have written instructions, making sure that we're letting people know, hey, I'm going to post everything in D2L, or I'm going to send everything to you on a Sunday night. Again, back to that communication point of this is not just typical accessibility. This is what do we do to meet those extra needs that those students have. And I love that we have so many instructional designers on here. I've spent time as an instructional designer, and I know that a lot of times we're focused very, very, small on very specific things. It has opened my eyes to see accommodation letters and to work with students on accommodation letters because there's, going back to some of those UDL practices, you can really see how a lot of that just overlaps with one another really well. Do we have any questions on any of that so far? I know I've probably gone very fast, but I also want to make sure that we have time for folks to share your stories even on things that you guys are doing. Feel free to unmute. I told you brevity is amazing. All right, brevity, if you want to talk about discussions and in-class presentation.
Yes. So working with really closely with students, instructors, even instructional designers, a lot of the things that come up, two big things are in-person presentations and online discussions and in-person discussions. So just kind of to touch base on about making those things accessible. And it really does include a lot of UDL as well. But in presentations, if there's some accommodations with those, and even just allowing the class, not just the students that have the accommodations, but everyone in the course just to have alternate ways of providing the information that they know. So if there's a presentation, maybe letting them do their video pre-recorded with their slides. So recording their voice over their presentation and then showing that to the class, because that might be easier for somebody that has anxiety or some other kind of something that's going to make them more nervous to present in front of the class. So like, I am so nervous right now. So I think I would have been a little less nervous if I could pre-record and do this over. But so just giving the students different options. So things like that, modifying the settings. So maybe dimming the lights if a student needs that a little bit, or allowing them to present not standing right in front of the entire class. The timing, giving them time to get through their presentation. It might take a little bit longer, or knowing that they know the information, but they might be speaking fast and not, counting them down for that because they need that to get through the presentation. Also, like allowing as a presenter yourself, giving slides ahead of time or materials ahead of time to help people process that and kind of know what's going on before. And then I also wanted to kind of talk about discussions. So that's something that's been a really hot topic lately in a lot of the meetings that I've been in, is just having something different than just the same discussions posted every week. Here is your topic. Make one comment, post what your information is, and then make one comment to another student. And it kind of just hits a dead end, and there's some good information and things that people get from those, but just having another way to communicate what you know and what you're learning from that week in class, or, that unit, being able to have students post a video of them talking, or post a voice clip, or pulling information from somewhere else and sharing that, but then also following certain parameters. So if you have a video, to have those captions, and having students learn how to do that is so great to make it accessible for everyone. So having the captions, or making sure that if they are putting a video with something, that they're including that information with it. So not just having, here's your answer, comment with one student, but giving different options for those students is really going to help everyone kind of feel connected, especially in an online class where you're not really meeting in person all the time, but you are just meeting online, and you're being able to like see someone's face or see what their personality is like and get their information from them that way. And then in-person discussions. So allowing students who don't like to be called on randomly, making sure that that's not a thing. If they want to be called on, they'll raise their hand, or jump in the conversation or giving people time. So not necessarily just always calling on the same person all the time, but giving everyone time to kind of think about what you're talking about and allow everyone to share. So just giving people multiple ways in person and online to share what they know is really helpful for students.
So I was reading through everybody's introductions. Thank you. Not that I was ignoring brevity. And it does look like we have a lot of instructional designers, a couple of folks in science. Before we move on, does anybody want to give us some of, your tricks of the trade or tips that, share any tips that you've found that work well with what you're doing with your instructors or with your students or your course building? And feel free to unmute, feel free to put it in the chat. Anybody running into a brick wall with anything? Okay. All right. We'll move on then. I think everybody in the room probably knows this. What we encounter a lot is now that a lot more people are becoming more familiar with WCAG and more familiar with the ADA Title II, there's still a lot of misunderstanding around screen readers and text to speech. Kristen, I love that you just said that. This is actually going to play really well into the checker tools that you just mentioned. And this is actually part of the point. So we've started been getting a lot of VPATs. We've started getting a lot of folks who are using the Panorama and D2L. There's a lot of reliance on some of the automated checking when I started doing this work, and not that it was in like the Stone Age, but even just 8, 7 years ago, you didn't have the automatic accessibility checker in Word. And then they did have the accessibility checker in Word, but it doesn't check for everything. And so keeping that momentum of, okay, this isn't gonna tell me everything I need to know. And that's similar to the screen reader versus the text to speech technology. If it's something works in a screen reader and something says it works on a screen reader, there's a lot of assumptions and fairly that means it's gonna work for the student who has the accommodation who needs text to speech, or sometimes people say I need audio books. Understanding that difference is really important, not just for the students, but for our testing centers, for our libraries, for our instructors, because as you are all well aware, JAWS and VDA, voiceover, those are going to read everything on the screen. I ran into a situation not too long ago where there's a nursing program that uses a specific software for testing that doesn't even have the capability of any kind of text to speech software being utilized in it. And at one point in history, they had students use voiceover on borrowed iPads, which is a huge, cognitive load, learning curve for a lot of people. And so we're working on that. We're still developing how can we help students who need text to speech in a program that you can't pull test out of that for like the NCLEX and stuff. But there was just a misunderstanding, right? That text to speech was not the same as screen readers, and there is a learning curve there. The other thing that we've come across is that NVDA and JAWS are going to sometimes interact with things differently than voiceover. We ran into this with a student using who had a soft chalk activity in her class, and it just absolutely would not work. And the instructor, who, by the way, was amazing and has been working really hard at making her class fully accessible, it just didn't. She had never come across a situation where it didn't work, and she asked honestly, like, well, can the student just use JAWS? Unfortunately, no. The student had become blind later in life, was not used to JAWS, was very, very slow at trying to use JAWS. And so they had to work out an alternative for that particular student. But that advocacy and that teaching space there, thankfully, that student's really good for advocating for herself. But then us just being able to come in and nicely explain, hey, these just unfortunately don't work the same as these other programs that have worked for your other students. We currently use for our text to speech, we use Microsoft for a lot of our tests. We find that a lot of students really, really like the voices in Microsoft. They like how the test scrolls. That also comes with some challenges. If you ever want to get into using Microsoft, just know that unfortunately the read aloud does not read formatted lists. So we spend time erasing formatting and then retyping it. We use Kurzweil. We've had a lot of really good luck at introducing the Kurzweil Read the Web extension to students, which has then allowed us to remediate more quickly for students who require that remediation within Kurzweil. And then we've used tools. We train students on the tools that are built into the text. So we work with students who are using McGraw-Hill, Cengage, Pearson. I'm probably forgetting a few, but we've spent a lot of time, even ourselves, going through course shells, figuring out what's being used so that we can turn around and train the students where to find the buttons, how to change the settings, that, all of that that a student needs to do. Because if it's just not there, if they don't know, they're just unfortunately not going to use it. Stephanie asked examples of what accessibility course design looks like. Are you wanting us to show that, or are you saying that's what you put together? I just want to make sure I understand the comment. I'll move on. But yeah, if you want to explain that, and you're right, right? That people just kind of look for that percentage of what makes something accessible and they move on. And sometimes there's buttons there that don't work in everything, but somebody can see it as an option. And so a student might click the podcast button and it doesn't actually make a podcast. Kristen is saying that they use Ally and UDOIT and Canvas. I haven't used either one of those, but I have been in Canvas, so I'd be really interested in being able to check how that integration works. But speaking of,
I've used
um,
You Do It in
I was
some
going to
ways.
say, speaking of remediation and getting into some of that, I'm going to pass it back over to Brevity, who is, yes, our specialist in all of that.
Yeah, so this kind of leads into what I was going to say anyway, but I've used You Do It, and they have a new one that came out a year or two, I want to say, that is supposed to be better. It's supposed to not just look for issues in Canvas, but also the documents inside of Canvas and the videos inside of Canvas. But I can tell you that it does not find all of them. So asking what score do I need? It says 99% accessible. Am I good? And there's not really a way to answer that because it's not checking everything, even though it says it does. So I've had to go through and I've done a lot of course evaluations and found things that are not accessible. So manual checks for accessibility are always going to be the best, even though You Do It. It really does steer you in the right direction. But yeah, just letting them know that it might be accessible for one student and not another. So we use a lot of third-party software. We use, like Wendeth is saying, Kurzweil and other read alouds. Adobe has a read aloud that isn't available in the free version, unfortunately, so the students don't have that as an option. But a student who is blind or low vision is going to have different accessibility needs than a student that can see what the PDF or the Word document that's in front of them. So keeping that in mind too, You Do It isn't taking those, and other checkers are not taking those into consideration. So PDF accessibility is tough. It takes a long time to make sure something is fully accessible, and it's not necessarily for everyone. So alternate formats is something that I'm really passionate about. And you're right. Yeah, You Do It is a really great starting point, but it's just not the end all be all, which is tough for people that aren't in the accessibility side or the instructional designing side that know about that. So um, just knowing that it's different for every student, it's different for every course. And yeah, we can see if a scanned document, those aren't accessible for anyone really. They don't look great. They don't read with screen readers. They aren't tagged. So there's things like that that you can say, yeah, that's not accessible. But then when you dig a little deeper, you can see things with other documents as well that aren't necessarily going to pop up with checkers.
And to piggyback on that, that sounds very similar to the panorama. And our school is actually changing the panorama um, touch point. I can't remember what it's called. Like just basically though, our CITL department is releasing a new panorama touch points. And so some of those scores are about to go down. Thankfully though, right? Because it's going to catch more things than what it was catching before. And Brevity, I was hoping, and I jumped in because I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit about how we use Abby and some of the things that we've learned in trying to scan those things, and also our experience with getting scanned documents from publishers.
Yeah. So publishers, the big ones, they have been creating, which is so great, is if inside of the course they have an online integrated textbook that students have as part of their course materials. So it's saving money for students a lot of the time, and not having to purchase like a hard copy textbook or a textbook outside of the course. And for the most part, it's cool because there's interactive things that they can do, quizzes, videos that they can click on, and then also just the main content that's normally in a textbook. But we have found some accessibility issues with those. And then also for students that need that alternate format. So if they need it outside of that integrated text, and we ask for a PDF from the publisher, they're sending us scanned PDFs from of the textbook, so pictures of the pages of the textbook, and they tell us that it's accessible in the integrated version, so that's why they can give us these scanned versions, which is a whole thing that kind of upsets me. But what I do when I get those scanned documents in, we have Abby, which is a software program that does a lot of things, but the main thing that we use it for is to OCR, so optical character recognition. So it'll go through and it'll recognize all the text, the images, and make it so if a student is using a screen reader or a text-to-speech software, it's going to read aloud instead of it just saying it's an image of a textbook. So there's a lot of things that we have to go through if we are getting these inaccessible documents from the courses themselves or even from the publishers, which they're giving us accessible versions in those integrated texts. But like I said, everything isn't accessible for everyone always. So we have to figure out where we're going to meet the student and give them what they need and what we have to do to get them that stuff. And it's usually a couple extra steps. And people are really great about working with us and getting us what we need to at least start from and be able to work with the instructors and the designers and show them, here's what we're doing, so that when you're planning this course or you're teaching this course, you can kind of keep it in the back of your mind when you're sharing new information or documents or videos, that's kind of in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and a little bit on that topic as well is OERs. I don't know how many of you are part of colleges or universities that have been adopting OERs. I think a lot of you are working at places that create OERs that places like us use. But we've been thankfully coming to more and more tables to talk about some of these various things because depending on where the OER is published, really depends on then its accessibility, but then also again this little a accessibility that's more about the different types of access that students need. So being able to modify the text size or even the text type. Will it work with a web-based screen reader, or do we need to pull it out and put it into the actual software? So in Kurzweil, whether they're using Read the Web or they're using the Kurzweil website, and then on top of that, it's how it's built, and that's again part of the conversation we've been having with folks. A lot of stuff we pull out, even if it's from the publisher, sometimes doesn't have even page numbers on it, and that doesn't help a student who needs to have something in a hard copy or even a digital because their teacher may reference a page number or they need to know where chapter 3 starts, and without some kind of table of contents and a page number on the page. And for those of you who are doing the work on the accessibility side, either as instructional designers or working in IT, these are small things that can easily get overlooked. I printed a whole book once, and as I'm putting it in a binder, I realized, oh my gosh, there's no page numbers on this, and I didn't even dawn on me that there wouldn't be a page number on something that came from a publisher. So these are just different things that we are experiencing on a variety of levels, and it really impacts the time that it takes to get something to the student, because if we have to do very much work to it before we get it and in the way that the student needs, there's a cost associated with that, whether it's by hiring somebody or paying for something to get printed, buying new software, et cetera. If we can get this stuff packaged in the right way, there's a lot less time, a lot less human resource and financial resource that requires us to then turn around and make sure that the student has it, which again, a lot of that gets covered under UDL. But when you're thinking about those accommodations that students have, UDL, it has that asterisk, right? When I used to teach on UDL, I tell everybody there's always an asterisk because not everybody is going to respond to the same thing. We're doing it the best that we can. Is there anything before I move on? Is there anybody, again, is there anything you want to share? Any questions that you all have? Any software that you're using that is amazing and magical and we should look into it and start using it ourselves? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Feel free to throw anything in the chat. The last thing I really want to touch on when we think about the what's next of accessibility is testing. We've talked about it a little bit, but testing is one of the really the biggest pressure points. You not only have a lot of students who have similar testing accommodations, but on top of that, you're adding the what the test means, the importance to the class or the importance of getting through a program. So for some students, they might just be fine in their regular class and maybe they don't even use a lot of the accommodations because when they're not in a high stakes situation, they can process things a lot better. But when you get into the testing situation, we work really, really hard to make sure that our students are ready to use those accommodations in that high stakes situation. I've been working with a lot of nursing students lately, and man, these poor kids are just they have got so much going on just through the entire week. They test weekly. And then it's like, okay, surprise, we have this new software to try to put this test in, and let's see if it's going to work for you. These folks being guinea pigs, in a high stakes environment is absolutely not ideal. And so again, we try really hard to get students to come in to look at the different softwares or get familiar with the softwares before they ever get into that testing environment. Working with the students to make sure that they know how to schedule the test, when to schedule the test. We have requirements with a very small testing center. And so some of our tests, we require them to make that testing appointment 7 days in advance. But the other layer of that is that the instructors have to make sure that they put the test information into the registration system so that the students can book it. So there's all of these layers that go into just somebody being able to schedule something that is already terrifying or is already very high stakes for their success. When we work with them on things like private rooms, on medical technology, so we have some that have hearing devices, and we need to make sure that that's also that's handled with dignity, right? Testing centers obviously have to maintain a level of compliance for themselves, but it's not comfortable for a student to walk in and have to, take out a hearing device that maybe doesn't look like what we're used to a hearing device looking like and have that examined and have to go through explaining what that device is. We've had students have full on panic attacks in the middle of a test and working with the testing center on a protocol on who to call and how we can be helpful to comfort them through those situations. And so testing is just another layer of trying to meet that student where they are. If I've got 5 nursing students and one of them needs it in one software and the other 4 need it in another, it's just something that the entire team that I work with, we're always willing to do the best that we can in the time that we have because of the stakes, because we want them to not give up on using their accommodations because it's just such an extra, it adds a barrier to use them. Claire just noticed that they use very few accessible resources at her institution, but they do a lot of human assist with reading and writing as needed by the students. Are there any free resources? I have never come across anything free. I would say that Microsoft Word has gotten better. So the read aloud function in Microsoft Word and the dictate function in Microsoft Word, those are both very good products. Google has gotten better in some of their accessibility products as well. A lot of the Google stuff that I started working on back when I was designing primarily with Google users, it was a lot of add-ons, and the challenge there was that, and I was working with high school students, the challenge there was there were blocks on the computers to be able to download those extensions. And so I hate to say it, but I've become more of a word of a word fan just because I have found that it tends to be friendlier and more accessible to those students. CanvasBot app to plan and test it will speed up your investigation. Oh, that's really cool. Is that only in the Canvas LMS, Ethan, or is that something completely different?
Yeah, from what I understand, it's a desktop app that'll connect through to the Canvas, yeah, to your Canvas instance. So I think it's limited to Canvas at this point. I think it's just a free software app.
Okay, that's really cool. That's good to know. I
Yeah,
that makes me wonder if there's a D2L version of that.
yeah, it could be forked maybe. I think,
Yeah.
so it grabs all of the documents from a Canvas course, pulls it all onto the local desktop, and organizes it all according to how they're organized in the course. So it'll give you folders for each module and put all the documents inside those folders. And it classifies the documents so you know all the different document types that are in the course and so forth. So it gives you
Wow.
spreadsheets on all of that. So I think it'll just kind of like organizes, what you're seeing from a course. And so we're using that for a pilot remediation that we're doing right now.
That is amazing. And I think mine and Brevity's both minds have just been blown because Brevity's done a lot of full D2L polls, especially for our blind low vision students. And that just sounds like something that would speed that up tremendously.
I sure hope so. We'll see
Yeah,
soon.
no,
Interested to
thank
see
you for
how it
sharing
goes.
that. Yeah, that's amazing. I actually want to pose a question to the group since there are so many instructional designers in here. Brevity and I, we constantly are talking about remediation, how to do it, more quickly with less people, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things, because we're running into, oh yeah, Adobe PDF, you can't use their reader. Well, how do we work with a student then who we just need to give them something that'll work with text to speech? We've been debating on just converting it to a Word document and crossing our fingers that perhaps like fixing headings and stuff like that might make it a smoother transition to the student so that rather than having to learn a different software, if we package it to them in a Word document, they can use that read aloud feature. Just curious if you guys have any thoughts on how horrible of an idea that might be, or if you've tried that and if it's worked with any success. Okay.
Yeah,
Are any of you, I'm
I
sorry,
haven't
please.
I haven't done it for remediation purposes, but I have done it for other purposes, go from PDF to Word.
Yeah.
There's about an 80% chance it'll lose all its formatting and be a mess,
Yeah. We run into that with
unfortunately.
tests. Yeah, no, you're right on that. That's what we run into that with tests, but that's a much smaller uh, document we're working with. Yeah, we definitely we've had varying experiences when we have to convert a PDF test into Word because it depends on where it comes from, and sometimes it's just faster to retype the whole test. But I wasn't sure if maybe some of our textbooks might export a little bit cleaner than some of the other things. Karen, it looks like you've exported that. Have you done something as large as a book or just kind of smaller pieces of material?
And I find Word is the most accessible as long as we're following all the, like how you're saying, the headings and the alt text and tables, um, and making sure it's following all those and the links and things like that. But yeah, for sure, I'm on the Word train.
Yeah, Beth, you're absolutely right regarding the copyright. So we still kind of have this process, and I say kind of because there's been a lot of change at our current institution in our DAS office, and we've heard from some other schools in the area. We still require proof of purchase when the student has to purchase the book, but I will be honest, and well, I guess this is recorded, so I could get found out. But I told a student once, I don't care what version you buy, right? Like we're trying to meet an accommodation, and so buy whatever version you need. We're going to get the version that we need to get you for the book that you need for your class, and that's kind of the best compromise I've been able to make with somebody. But oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, with the conversion. No, yeah, I appreciate that. We've had to convert some things to Word for some of our students who use like Braille refreshers and that sort of thing. But again, that's a whole different ball game than trying to do that on a larger scale with students who just need the PDFs, but also the text to speech. Are any of you all using Orbit Note from what used to be Text Help and is now Everway?
It's a text to speech software.
Okay, I find a lot of 4 years use it, and I noticed that a lot of the folks in the room were 4 years. So I was curious how popular it was in your organizations and wanted to get your experiences on that. We've really, I won't say stopped offering it to students. We still really, Equatio is kind of the corner of the market on some of that math text to speech, although we found some limitation in it. But what we found with Orbit Note, if you're familiar with Kurzweil, Orbit Notes allows you to upload the PDF and the student can do that themselves. The downside that we're finding is that you can't really upload a whole textbook to that, which is one of the reasons why we really just stopped giving it to students, because we found that if we're going to have to give you a whole textbook, we're going to have to put you into Kurzweil anyway. And then we'd rather teach you how to put the smaller PDFs in there. And I was just curious if you guys, if anybody else has shifted away from any of that. But I do notice a lot of institutions, they just 4 years, they just give everybody PDFs, and then you can get read write, Orbit Note, Equatio, and that sort of thing. And we haven't seen a lot of luck with that, but it could just be our geographic experience or something. We do have some students who come from the high schools with the read write experience, and I think those are the most of our users are the students who are already using read write. But
Like
back,
Robin said, they have Orbit Note, but don't use it very much.
yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious if the lack of use is more about its lack of usability, or if people have just shifted away from it. We've seen, and Brevity can confirm this, we've seen a lot less remediation that we're doing, even pulling of materials, because of the number of materials that already include text to speech. McGraw-Hill, Campbell's, Pearson, that sort of thing, which has been very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then again, to stick with the testing again, I think it's hard to get word out. Oh yeah, yeah, we do Kurzweil for tests as well, Robin. Especially if we have to fix pronunciations or there's images that we have to add some text to. Kurzweil is the go-to for that. Um, and Stephanie, oh my gosh, you are speaking to the choir. If I was a smarter person, I would quit my day job and write something for math, because that is just, I think both Kurzweil and uh Equatio, I think they only go really to so high of math. And I'm at a community college, and we're not talking about super high levels of math here. Beth, you're absolutely right. We really stress people use the equation writer in Word. I think the biggest barrier that we're finding with that is that it reads way more information than what most of our students need. So it almost reads more for like a blind low vision student. It'll read, open parent and then all of the stuff, superscript, subscript. A lot of our students don't need to hear all of that extra information. And I kind of really wish there was maybe more of a middle ground. Again, going back to that Kurzweil, Patrick's on the call. I'm not going to make him unmute because he already told us he doesn't want to talk. But Patrick is one of our fantastic remediators, among other things, at ACC. And Patrick just got through doing a full remediation of an algebra book. And I probably wouldn't have even known all the words to put into that. So remediating math is very, very tricky regarding what everybody needs it. But I will say that it's really helpful when an instructor uses the equation writer when we need to fix things like font size, because then when you expand it, it all stays together much better. And I know we're coming down to the end. I love that you guys have all gotten so involved. Anything else anybody wants to say? I will even leave like my last points out because they're just like advocacy points. But I'd love for anybody else to jump in, share anything they want to share. Any suggestions that you have. I'm going to go and talk to our CITL people and see about a D2L bot, see if we can help get stuff pulled out of D2L for us. Oh yeah, thanks for that link.
Robin
Definitely
mentioned math
share
picks.
that.
I'm going to check that out for sure and see how that works
Great.
instead of equation.
Yeah, you guys have all been great. I really appreciate the input you guys have. When I asked Brevity if she wanted to do this, she was like, "I don't like talking in front of people." I'm like, "No, it really just needs to be a conversation about accommodations and how we can help students." So I really, really appreciate the time you guys have. I don't know if our emails are posted anywhere, so I'm going to put mine in the chat. And feel free to reach out. Feel free to ask for anybody else's name. I will tell you all of my people's names and you can chat with all of them. But again, thank you for the work that you do around accessibility, around course design, around working with your instructors and your students. I really, really appreciate every one of you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, if that's it, thank you all for attending. I've pasted in the chat the feedback form. So please, upon exit, complete the feedback form so that we'll get some feedback on our session. This is really important feedback for us for the conference. Thank you to our presenters. This was really very informative. It was kind of exciting for me just listening to, some of the accommodations because I do teach both special ed students as well as special ed instructors who intend to go into the special ed classroom. And, it's because I come from Trinidad and Tobago and we don't have all of these accommodations in place necessarily, it's always a challenge and the human resource is somewhat limited. So it was really nice to hear from you all and to hear some of the things that, we can do, even if on a limited scale. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. If I ever find anything free, I'll try to make sure to pass it out. But man, there's nobody giving anything away out there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. Thank
Thank you.
you.